Hello watercolor lovers, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. I've seen time and time there are a lot of questions asked about watercolor paper in a lot of forums and Facebook groups. So I want to make a video so beginners can understand what's the fuss about watercolor paper. But after watching this video, you will gain some knowledge of watercolor paper and you will be comfortable picking your own watercolor paper which suits for your painting. Before we get on to it, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. Let's jump on to grades of watercolor paper. So there are two types of watercolor paper: student grade and professional grade. And professional grade also called as artist grade. When it comes to professional grade watercolor paper, it also known as archival paper. So the paper also becomes yellow and brittle as it gets older. Regardless, the colors look rich and the values stick pretty good as it dries out. Whereas in student grade, the color gets dull and the values go lighter on the painting. So we have to glaze and lay more color and pigments to get the exact values and pigment consistency. Let's look into some of the examples of the painting I have done. So this painting was done in a student grade watercolor paper. You can clearly see that it does look dull. I did have to layer and glaze several times to get the exact value on the top of the trees to make it vibrant. It did look vibrant in the second wash and it got lighter as it dries out. This painting was done on a professional grade watercolor paper, Saunders Waterford, cold pressed 140lb 300 GSM. What it means, I'll explain it later. You can clearly see the painting looks vibrant and I have to apply the painting only once and the color and value sticks properly on the paper. Being said that, we have to layer the pigment regardless in any watercolor painting, but the color looks fresh and values are on point on professional watercolor papers. This is another example of a painting done on a student grade watercolor paper. Even though the painting have a lot of color variation, it does look dull and the values are a little bit off here and there. I did have to layer and glaze over it several times to get a decent painting out of this. Let's look into a painting done on a professional grade watercolor paper. This painting was done on Saunders, as I showed down on the painting before. In this painting, you can clearly notice that the colors are vibrant and it looks fresh. We can see the difference, the paintings which was done on a student and a professional grade. If you are starting on watercolors or a beginner, I highly recommend practice a lot of paintings on a student grade so you get the gist of it. I will provide all the links of the watercolor paper I have shown in this part of this video in the description. So let's look into weight of the watercolor paper. So the weight of the watercolor paper comes in two weights, the lightweight and the heavyweight. The quality doesn't vary between the lightweight and the heavyweight. It depends upon the weight of the watercolor paper. So what I mean by that is, so watercolor paper can be measured in pounds and GSM. So lightweight paper can be anything between 140 lb and 300 GSM, and it might need a little bit of stretching. Whereas heavy paper, which is 140 lb, and it can be like 300 to 400 GSM or 800 GSM, it goes above it, or it can be like more than 140 lb. A lot of artists prefer heavy paper because it rarely needs stretching unless you're doing a heavy wash on it. But whereas for the light paper, it might need stretching, but the trick is to, while you paint, just tape the light paper on a drawing board or a table or an easel and wherever while painting on it. Let's look into the texture of the watercolor paper. Okay, so the watercolor paper comes in three texture forms. One is hard pressed, cold pressed, and rough surface. I don't want a rough surface, but there is a slight difference between the cold press and surface, but I'll show you as we go along. So this is called hard pressed. You can see the watercolor paper is smooth. So you can see there's no texture in my watercolor paper. Whenever I want to do any kind of foggy painting or whenever I want smooth transitions, I usually go for art pressed. So I'll show an example of a painting so you guys can see why I went with this painting, because you can see the transition between the background, the midground and the foreground. I want to have a smoother transition. So that's why I tend to use the art press for this painting specifically, because I want to create a mood in my painting. I want to have smoother transitions in my painting. So let's look at the cold pressed. So when you see the cold press, there's a texture surface here. When you rub it, you can hear that sound. So because of the texture. So the rougher surface is a little bit rougher than this, and that's the only difference, but I don't see any difference between the cold press and that rough surface. I usually go for cold press like this, so it just serves my purpose. So you can see I did a painting on a cold pressed watercolor paper. You can see these highlights are just coming from my paper. I didn't paint this like these highlights because when I use the brush, a dry brush on it, it just gives this beautiful highlight. So whenever I do like really hot weather or when I want to create textures like this, I usually tend to go for cold press. So pick a surface which serves your purpose of painting and subject and go for it. Let's talk about tinting in watercolor paper. So when I talk about tints, you can see there's a difference between these two watercolor paper. There's a little bit of yellowish tint, like a warmish tint in my Saunders Waterford watercolor paper, whereas this watercolor paper you can see it is kind of white. There is also another watercolor paper which is like whiter than this, but I don't want it. So there is also different kind of tints you can buy in watercolor paper. There is also a black watercolor paper you can buy and you can paint on it. So pick something which serves your purpose and buy accordingly. Watercolor also comes in different forms you can buy from. So the first one is rolls. You can buy the rolls of a watercolor paper, then you cut it however size you want it, then you can paint on it. And there's also something called loose sheets. They allow like loose sheets like this. You can take it and paint on it. And there's also something called watercolor block. I don't want a block, but it's kind of like this, but it's a thicker, heavier watercolor paper. And there's also something called watercolor pad. So this is a watercolor pad. So you just rip up a sheet from this watercolor paper and you paint on it. And yeah, so find something which works for you and buy it, and good luck and have fun painting. Thanks for watching this video, and let me know what you learned from this video and what's your favorite watercolor paper what I showed from today. And if you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, let me know in the comments or write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. And thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please hit the subscribe button and get weekly video updates without missing any updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And thank you so much for your support. And good luck with your painting, folks.